issue with our pull stream based Mplex implementation. That's been open for a long time, but that's finally ready to go into JSIPFS. We should see some improvement boosts switching over to that. I also implemented message signing for JS PubSub. That is the base of that is done. I need Vashko, who will be back tomorrow, to do the release and final review on that. And then I will probably look at doing validation update for that as well, because we're not currently doing any validation on the JS side, but that shouldn't take too long to implement. Also did some DHT CPU testing for JSIPFS. I'll finish that up this week, and then probably sync up with Raul on priorities. And then if everything looks good, then I'll probably tackle the JS libp2p NAT traversal, so we can get some more direct connections, because as we were going through the DHT updates, saw a lot of issues with just all the JS nodes, even node, want to connect over circuit relays to a lot of things. So just trying to avoid that so we can get some better performance improvement there. That is it.
Awesome. I just started recording as you went, so I'm just going to do for posterity very quickly summarize my update again. Essentially, yeah, that the test lab is usable. I'm looking for partners and to establish like an actual roadmap that I can be accountable to, and the teams that want to do benchmarking can be accountable to. And getting that started. And then I'm also going to start working on the self-dialing issue, which I've linked in the notes. And with my recap done, I'll move to Youssef.
All right, so there's somebody using like an impact driver, a jackhammer next door, so I'll try to keep this quick and spare you guys. Basically, my head right now is like transitioning fully to specs for the next 4 weeks or so. I'm gonna try and like use my whole ass on the specs repo, if I may, more or less. Like I'm probably gonna still try and do a few other bits of work on the docs, especially if something gets clarified through with the specs process, but that's like my thing, is to try and commit to that. So in service of that, I made a tracking work tracker spreadsheet if anybody's interested in like chiming in on priority. Raul and I are gonna try and think about that this week so that I can have a clear head. And basically the big plan is like do some cheerleading for the PRs that are stuck and do edits as needed, and then try to form a plan for like what the main specs document should look like what is the first thing you see when you see the libp2p specs, and work like an outline of that, and then figure out how we get there. So that that planning process is probably going to be ongoing throughout the next week or two, but I'm going to try and make progress on the sort of works in progress that we can clean up. So.
Is this something that would live on like docs.libp2p.io?
I think so. I mean, we could render it to like a to look nice in the doc site. I think the main, I still think like going to, a lot of people will just want to go to the GitHub repo and browse them that way. That seems like a perfectly fine way to consume them. But I've been working on for like the Filecoin Friday hacks of like taking Markdown and massaging it a little bit so Hugo likes it. So I think it's a pretty easy job to take the specs repo and format it nicely there.
Yeah, I think that'd be great. Awesome. Cool. Viso.
Hey guys, here I am again to get video on from candid camera. Okay, so last couple of weeks I've been busy a little bit, running a bunch of small things while I've been working with the relay. So basically the most important was that we found and fixed an ancient SecIO bug that was causing panics in Mplex, but that was pretty nasty bug. So that was a big success that we stopped crossing relays from Mplex indefinitely. So I also added some functionality to put a deadline in the handshake for the relays, so that basically if you can't establish the hop stream, the stop handshake within a minute, then abort it, because probably the caller is going to have a connect timeout of 1 minute and timeout, and the connection is going to be bad anyway. Okay, and then like I did a bunch of things, like with PubSub, I opened a PR for the reward validator pipeline. So we want to bubble this up and basically to expose it on the P2P daemon. So we have to work for Mandas there if you want it. Okay, and I also did the strict signature message signature validation that prompted Jake to implement message signing in JavaScript. So we did it a little recklessly with Steven, but like it worked well because now we have message signing in JavaScript, which is great. Okay, and now we're back to relays, where, as I was saying before we started the recording, I've started an experiment by deploying an Mplex only relay. So the rationale is that the Mplex throughput is much higher than YAMLs. I noticed that our relays, like busy as they are, they're pushing some 200 megabits per second, and this would be, like in gigabits, like at least 1 gigabit per second. So I started an Mplex on the relay, and quickly, like it got inundated with connections. I'm still trying to explain why that particular relay got so many connections. But what happened is that like the throughput climbed to 800 megabits, and then we ran out of memory because we had, like some 10 million coroutines going on, like in processing. So, like I executed a hard limit. There is an OpenPI for that on the coroutines that can serve hop streams, and that stabilized it. So it seemed to be doing fine. And then, like this sudden memory buildup appeared out of nowhere. It's kernel memory, and we're trying to debug that. So I'm not going to repeat myself, like on the record about my, my debugging adventures, but basically what appears to be a kernel memory leak or something related. That causes the relays to crash while there's still memory in user space.
To rewind a little bit, I would just love if you could link in the notes to the Mplex issue you ran across, because I'm curious about that. I've run into something similar like that a while ago, so I'd love to see that.
Okay, so first let me say that I can travel my audio in, so I can very choppy audio from you, Carl. I'm guessing that you're asking about the layback, the kernel bug.
I'll message you out of band. I just would love to see something added to the notes. It's no worries.
Sorry, man, I hear you. I don't know why. Okay, so anyway, it's a very bug, and I'm going to debug this. I've tried with tuning the net buffers and cutting them reload just to do kilobytes per TCP connection. Like that has some effect on steady state memory usage, but I don't know about the build up. So it appears out of nowhere somewhere between 115 and 117K connections suddenly start filling up kernel memory. Again, I'm tracking this with SMM so up on top. And I don't know what it is yet. I might have to resort to, like doing some low-level kernel debugging to figure out what's happening because it's very hairy. Anyway, the end game for that experiment is I want to run with Mplex only release because Mplex is a similar protocol than YAML, so it has higher input indeed. The problem is that there is a couple of bugs in Mplex. So one of them is a remote error. So we seem to be getting constantly 20 bytes of data after we should close the stream. And this log spams really badly. That prompted me to prepare to downgrade the log. It got to the point that it filled logs in the relay. I had to go, like stop this log, delete the logs, and restart it. I also made a little path actually such that. But there is a second problem that appears to be a real bug, real issue. So basically, some of an assertion spits out a log error that says, "Oh, I've leaked the connection. I've leaked it. I don't know what it is. I can see." So we're going to fix that before we, like make relays Mplex only sure. So the plan first. So another thing I want to do, I want to do an augmentation relay. Because I've been thinking about why we're getting so many connections in a single relay, and we have all the other relays being step around 40 to 50 connections. And this guy is getting 100 connections. I think it has to do because I restarted, like I restarted a couple times, with this number running well. I think it might be because we're hitting the DHT a lot more frequently, so it's more likely to show up in the queries for find relays. So that's my surmise about that, but it's by no means, like a certain assertion that's going to speculation. But anyway, I want to leverage the passive discovery that we have built in the relays. So when we're going to find relay in auto relay, we can use the relays to some of who might be already connected. Again, merge them, blend them with the relays, we get discovery. So this increase reliability of a relay. This is prompted by an issue that a user opened, so that's what I want to do. And the other thing I'm going to start working on finally, as I've been thinking for too long, is a ground holds serves factor design document. So I'm going to write up some notes about how I'm planning to change the goal libp2p internal, so working on consensus on that, and that will happen in the next couple of weeks. So that's from me for the lengthy update. Busy little bit.
Awesome. Thank you. Next up is Adim.
Yeah, so a bunch of PubSub updates last week. One is the last writer wins configuration is now much faster on initial resolution, so like 100 milliseconds plus finding a peer over the DHT, which is where it should be. The PubSub value router, which as far as I can tell is only really being used for IPNS, was fixed up. You can sort of check the issues there. It was just being really slow for kind of unnecessary reasons. And next up, I'm going to be trying to move the bootstrap logic into PubSub using the discovery interface. Because it seems reasonable that when you initialize PubSub, you want it to bootstrap. So why not provide it a way to do that instead of having it be external? The issue is linked there if you're interested in that. And then I'm going to try and wrap the ongoing rendezvous PR in the discovery wrapper and see if I can get all of those things to play nicely together. And then finally, I got to rewrite some of my PubSub PR changes to be a little more channel-y, so they flow nicely with the rest of the gossip subcode.
Awesome, thank you. And last up, we have Raul.
Hey folks, how's it going? DIDA version 2, finally moving along. I made another push on this. The next iteration, I feel really good about this one. It has incorporated basically all of the design decisions and review that were part of the first iteration, which were really good. We now have a preparer, which in turn can be a sequence of preparers. So we're not dealing with like multiple, cardinality per each element in the DIDA, but each in itself can be an aggregate if you want it to be an aggregate. Right now, it only makes sense for the preparers, which in turn can be a pipeline of preparers. Then the next element along is an address resolver, which can then very easily be replaced by when you, right now the routed host construction, we could basically remove it, we can scrap it, and whenever you instantiate a discovery gadget with libp2p, the discovery process can inject its address resolver, and that's it. So it becomes really simple. The next step is a planner, and basically this is the thing that is scheduling dials and times. So it receives the known addresses, and then it receives a channel where it will continue getting more addresses as they're being discovered. When you plan a new dial, the planner actually returns a plan, and the plan is kind of like a state machine sort of thing. It's intended to be reactive, so it gets events from the pipeline as things are happening, so that it can react to them, right? So it gets events when new addresses are discovered, when the discovery is finished, there are no more addresses to be discovered, whenever a dial job is completed, whether it's an error or a success, so it can take decisions, right? And last but not least, then there is the throttler, which is the one that is in charge of guarding resource usage, essentially. And finally, there's the executor, which is the thing that actually dispatches the dial and talks to the network and uses the transport itself to talk to the network. So this is kind of like the structure. I have pasted a few links. Right now there is no PR. I'm going to close the first PR because the discussion there was great, but it's very long. So let's start afresh. I'm going to open a new PR today, and I've just linked the source file for the interfaces, which is where I think you'll be able to kind of like get, it's very well documented. I tried to, at least this particular file, I tried to document it really well. And before I file the PR, I'm going to do a pass on documentation everywhere, because I think this is a critical component. It has stayed very undocumented in the past. It's been very, very spaghetti, and we really want to start, with this sort of like policy from now onward. So before I open the PR, I'm going to do that.
Awesome.
Okay, so that's for the dialer. Aside from kind of like, usual stuff like calls and so on, did some debugging with Visa and so on. But I think what's important is what I'm going to work on next, which is finish the dialer, finish the core refactor. Then I'm going to review Visa. I'll owe you a review on the PubSub async validator, so I'm going to do that very soon. And I'm going to start preparing my talk for Data Terra Nemo, which is happening next week in Berlin. One more thing is that
Raul, you have a bot to write.
Sorry?
You have a bot to write.
No, you just keep chucking stuff on me, right? Well, we had a discussion, what Visa is referring to. If you haven't seen it yet, we had a few discussions about, in general, software practices and engineering practices, and the way that we do releases, the way that we bubble up those releases, if we're going to have weekly or bi-weekly or monthly, release cycles on the top level projects, what needs to be true before we actually tag a release, like how much testing it needs to have undergone, not only in the top level project, but also in the leaf projects. We had some really good discussion about this. We need to summarize it for the community and to let the community also pour into that discussion. But part of that is, let's start automating more of our stuff. So that's where the bot comment comes in. And finally, I need to present Phantom Drift to you guys, which is the libp2p visualizer. We got the design mockups 3 weeks ago or 4 weeks ago, I think, but we haven't honestly had time with like OKRs and 1,000 other things and performance reviews and everything else. We hadn't had time to actually present them to the team. So hopefully we'll be doing this this week, because we need to move on with the execution and the implementation of that now.
Totally. To jump back a little bit, is the dialer stuff kind of introducing an early iteration of an event bus for P2P?
No, and that's what Gonzalo, I think, is here for. He's been silent most of the time, but we interacted a little bit on an issue. So I don't know, Gonzalo, if you want to provide an update.
Cool.
Sorry to put you into the limelight.
Yeah, sure. So I've been playing with a couple of projects and using libp2p. And one of the requirements, at least that we have, is to be able to execute arbitrary functions when, for example, a specific DHT message is received by the host, by the node. So I've been like sort of forking the code, trying some sort of workarounds which look very ugly in my opinion. And then I opened the issue and start discussing with Raul what could be actually the best way to go about it. And it seems that you guys already started thinking and discussing about the event bus, sort of a very like, it would be very awesome to have this sort of a pipeline of events that would be handled by sort of another layer, so that we don't have to mess up with the code. So basically, that's my sort of a requirement would be something like that. I'm now getting through documentation or like the issues you guys have sort of written before, trying to catch up with what's the status now.
Mm-hmm. So one thing that I wanted to point out is somehow we've been conflating the host refactor, the service-based host refactor with the event bus, but they don't need to happen at the same time, or they're not actually, they don't need to have, they're not dependent on one another at all. We can work in parallel, we can start implementing the event bus now. And what is key to unblock the event bus is the core refactor, because we do plan to have all the events that can be emitted, the abstract events that can be emitted by components, we don't want like any dependent that is going to be subscribing to those events to have to like dig into the particular module, the particular implementation. These events should be abstract, right? And they should live under core. So once we have the core refactor, once that is landed, we can create, you know, an events package, and we can start modeling all the structs there. And essentially, you know, the event bus it's a simple abstraction that could be part of the host. And basically all components in the system have access to the host. So at the same, like, just like the peer store is kind of like this top level component, the event bus would be a sibling of that right now. This is like my current thinking. I don't know if you guys have like feedback on that, because I really don't think it's, you know, it's dependent at all on the service-based refactor. The service-based refactor of the host is important for when services like actually depend on one another, but they depend on one another optionally and so on, and but not really when they depend on like core infrastructure.
So that's
which is always available.
So that's in line with what we've been discussing and planning with Raul about the host-based host service refactor. So it's important to remove the dependencies, you know, like from for the consumers of the actual Leaf packages. So we'll just pull all the event buses and eventually just have a method on the host that says event bus, and it gives you the event bus for the host, and then you can subscribe to events and do everything through the interface.
Exactly. Yeah.
Is there?
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, is there any documentation or specs of what kind of events with the different packages and different services, and how to sort of split those services and like how would sort of start putting the ideas?
Really, we don't have that, but we can work with you, Gonzalo, if you want to take the lead on this. I don't think it's going to be like super hard to produce. I don't think this is one of those things that are super complex or whatever. So if you want to, like, you know, make a contribution here, you'd be super welcome, and we'll make sure to guide you through it in terms of what events are valuable in each component, and sort of like the architecture that, you know, we have loosely discussed because we haven't like actually discussed it properly, right? So
yeah, it seems quite self-contained, so definitely could start kind of taking a look at it and start a discussion. Yeah,
I think like DOM lifecycle events are probably a decent model, because like right now we just literally rely on like sleeps and loops to see if like certain conditions are met. So it just things like, you know, component cycles and things like that. Like those will be probably most of what are used, like just helping linearize initializations, and then other stuff like I think will crop up as, you know, as we dig deeper. But I think honestly, like kind of string namespaces and event names is probably like appropriate for what we're looking at. Definitely super excited, and feel free to ping me on any of those issues. Something I've been thinking about. So
just regarding like event bus in general, like one pattern I've noticed in like iOS development is that oftentimes when you have like a delegate or you have a callback, you'll also would post an event with like the high level details of like, even if you don't have any registered listeners or whatever, just as like a broadcast to, hey, you might not be directly subscribed, but you might care. So we could go through and look at places where we have like existing like hard coupled callback relationships, see those as opportunities. Like, is this where it would be useful place for that?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so definitely Viso can inform a lot of that. Much of like the auto relay, auto-nad, the identified push, like all of these, you know, the initialization, the bootstrapping of the DHT and everything that, you know, like that relies on that, you know, are things that like we have challenges that we have encountered that have led us to think, hey, we need an event bus, right? So this is kind of like all in our heads, and I think we should, like, while we can do that scan of the code base, I think like, you know, this Pareto principle applies here. With just 20% of the effort, we can cover 80% of the scope of this. Yeah. So I don't know how we should proceed with this. I'm okay opening kind of like an issue where in Go libp2p or potentially even specs, because ideally this could be something that we spec for all implementations. How do you guys feel about that?
So I kind of like the idea of it being in specs if like events are, especially if they're identified by string or like some like, your discovery module should have this, event identifier or something.
Yeah, I think we'll come up with requirements. Like I'm thinking about this as well. Like, you before subscribing to an event, you want to know if there is an emitter registered for that event, because you could be waiting for something that will never come. So, there are like many requirements, and we can find inspiration. Like I would say Timebox, maybe looking at how Netty does it, how the DOM does it, how other things do it, just like Timebox it to 1 day max, to gain some inspiration of like what are the challenges that they're solving, just to, do a breadth first scan of the ecosystem. And once we have that, I think we'll have like pretty good insight. Then there's Guava Event Bus, for example, in the Java world. There are like so many examples.
So in terms of where should we do it, I think we should do it in Go libp2p first, because it's very specific to the Go libp2p architecture. I'm sure that Rust has a different architecture, and JavaScript has a different architecture even. So let's keep it in Go libp2p at least for the start, and if we see that we're using the abstraction elsewhere as well, then we can make it a spec. But let's not make it a spec before we implement it.
Yeah, we don't want to be too heavyweight with this. What I would say is let's open it and Go libp2p, have the implementation focus sort of like discussion there, and open an issue in libp2p specs that points to, hey, there is this discussion going on, and it's potentially, something that we might want to standardize on in the future, so that it's at least in that radar.
So Raul, a procedural question: how do you want to do the design? Do you want me to make a markdown document, like in Go libp2p, and open a PR so we discuss it on the PR, or should it be an issue? I think it should be a document. Yeah,
how are you like right now in terms of bandwidth? Because I think we have some momentum with this particular issue, with Gonzalo also needing it, and like we have, a lot of people think like some thought here. And if you're okay with bandwidth and you can do this quickly, then it's fine. Otherwise, we can find another solution.
So, I mean, my bandwidth is limited, but this is something I've been thinking about for a while, and it's also important. So, I'll do it. Okay. I mean, the Mplex only relays, I think, is pretty much critical before we turn on auto relay by default. Like in IPFS, which is going to happen this release or the next, somewhere close, probably the next. Okay. But like in the meantime, there's no reason to not kickstart the discussion around the host service design, so that when we reach consensus, I'm ready to implement it instead of it having to wait for a month of discussion until we reach consensus. So I'm gonna write.
But we're talking about the event bus right now, and we explicitly decoupling.
Yeah. It's gonna be the event bus is gonna be part of it too. So I'm gonna spec out how the event bus is gonna look. So I'm gonna make a roadmap that will say, hey, here is the things that we want to implement. It's gonna be a 3-step process. The first process will be, okay, let's get the internals of the libp2p host refactored so that they use services internally and they're nice and not get hoggery. And then the second step is going to be remove, like the kludges, like the context argument from our services, and make all services self-contained. And the third step is going to be, okay, now that we have that, we can add a dependency, which is the event bus, and then we can have the event bus being injected in the constructor or coming from the host. Ideally coming from the host, so we don't have to change so much, and then we can spec out the event bus.
Okay, what we're discussing right now is that we want to decouple the host refactor from the event bus itself, because they're not really related to one another.
Okay, that's fine.
So they can happen in parallel, and at the end of the day, when the host refactor happens. Then
let's open an issue. Let's open an issue about the event bus. Let's open an issue about the event bus and Go libp2p. And in the meantime, I can start working on the document, and we can link to this document from both the issues that we have open. We say, hey, here is the design. But basically, what I want to get out of it is I want to have in the design document, I want to have the event bus interface, so that we can actually spec here's how it's going to look, and then we can implement it independently.
Yeah, so it sounds to me like what we need to do is a bit of requirements gathering, so to speak. So what I'll do is I'll get an issue specifically for the event bus started, so we can all pitch in and like at least get some thoughts rolling, because they've all been brewing in our heads, and we need to get them on a common place right now. Make sense?
In the interest of time, because we're quite a bit over at this point, I will probably say we should move on, but Raul, I think you added the note about the release discussion on Slack. That's definitely something I took the time to look at this morning. I think it's something we should probably start doing, but probably should keep the combo out there. Yusuf?
No, I just added the note, but I just figured
awesome.
we want to talk about it. But I think, there's a lot of hashed out in Slack, and it's probably better just to synthesize that into like a document.
Totally. But yeah, I think that's something that we should probably look into. And offhand, does anybody know the UTC time of next week's meeting? Because I still don't know it, so I just want to write it down. It's never been written down anywhere that I can see.
Am I in UTC? UTC plus 8.
Looks like it's 1 a.m. UTC,
Awesome.
and it's technically on Tuesday.
Okay.
Yeah. Monday night. That'll get confusing. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So that's technically on the 14th at 1 a.m.
So regarding the discussion that we had on Slack, that was great to align, do a bit of brainstorming, but we need to take this on to the community for openness and transparency. So who would like to take the lead to summarize that? Yusuf, are you okay with that?
Yeah, I'm good with that. I'll go through the thread and I'll work backwards from most agreement and then figure out if there are any things that we.
Cool. The timer is hitting 0 right now, so I'm going to call it for today. But I will talk to you beautiful people in libp2p later.
Yeah. Bye.